Alright, now that users can log into our application, let's display account data for the authenticated user. So what's going to happen is after the user logs in, we're going to navigate the user to some kind of home page that we're going to create. And then on that home page, in the top right, we're going to display some kind of hello username, with username being the authenticated user's username. So the first step, let's create that home view that we'll navigate to. So over in our views folder, let's add a new item. This will be a user control. That's again what we use for views in WPF, and this is going to be the home view. So we'll add more to this home view in the future, but for now, we're just going to have hello username in the top right, with username being the authenticated user's actual username. So this content being at the top, it's going to be kind of like a header. So let's have some row definitions here, and we're just going to have one row for now because this is all we're adding is this header content. And then in this first row, we're going to have a grid, and in this grid, we're going to have two columns. So let's have this first column is going to be with star, so it's going to take up all the space in this first row. But then we're going to have another column with auto, and this will take up as much space as needed. So we're going to put the hello username content in this second column, which is going to push it all the way to the right, since this first column will take up all the space to the left. So for this hello username content, this can just go in a text block in grid column 1. And inside this text block, we're going to have to concatenate some content together. So for that, we're going to specify runs here. So we can have a bunch of runs in here, and each of these can have different content, and all of this content will make up the text block's text. So this first run, we'll just say hello, comma, and we'll have a space here too. And then the second run is actually going to be a binding to the user's username, which will be stored on the view model. And then after this, we'll just have an exclamation point. So really the reason we're using runs here is so that we can put this binding between this other text pretty easily and keep it contained within one text block. So again, this is really all we're going to do for the home view for now. So let's get into creating the home view model that'll provide the data for the view. Anyways, let's create that home view model in our view models folder. A class for the home view model. This will inherit from view model base, as all view models should. And on this view model, we need to expose a username property. So the username isn't really going to change on this view model. So in this case, what I'm going to do is actually make it read only. So we're going to have a string property for username, and for now, we'll just return username. So this should be enough just for generally setting up the home view and view model. So now, after the user logs in, let's navigate to the home view. So in our login command, we're going to need a navigation service. So an I navigation service. And this navigation service should take us to the home page. So we'll call this the home navigation service. And let me just regenerate this constructor now. So let's take care of that. And then after we successfully log in, let's go ahead and take that navigation service and simply navigate. And that'll navigate us to the next page in our app, which we want to be the home view. So that being said, we're going to have to pass in a home navigation service to this login command. So let's see, we initialize that in our login view model. So we're going to have to pass in some kind of home navigation service. We can get that passed through the login view model constructor. So let's add that. So we'll have to pass this in when we initialize the login view model. So let's go ahead up to our app.xaml.cs where we do that. And this last parameter is going to have to be a navigation service for a home view model, which will resolve from dependency injection. So since we're resolving this from dependency injection, we're going to have to register it. So let me just copy this other registration. I should really extract this registration logic for navigation services into some kind of helper. So we can do something like services.add navigation service, and it'll just take care of all of this. I might have to add that to my MVVM Essentials package. But for now, we'll just copy it. So we're registering a navigation service for the home view model. Let's register that, which means we'll pass in a factory to initialize that home view model. And right now that takes no parameters. All right, so we should have the navigation set up. So after we log in, we'll navigate to the home view model. So let's go ahead and run this and see that in action. So let me put in my email that I registered with before, as well as my password, and let's log in. And here we go, success. And we're taken to the home view model, which I forgot to map to a home view. So in our main window, we're gonna have to set up a data template that maps home view models to home views. Let's do that real quick. So the home view model, whenever that's the current view model of our application, we're gonna map that to a home view. And if you have any questions or confusions about our navigation setup here, be sure to check out the part where we added the register view, because in that part, we really got into setting up the navigation infrastructure. And I also have plenty of other resources on my channel where I get into navigation concepts, so consider checking those out too. But now that we map our home view model to our home view, this should actually work now. So let me log in. Here we go. Success. And now we get an error. So two-way or one-way to source binding cannot work on the read-only property username. So what's going on here is on our home view, we're binding the text of this run to the username property on our home view model. But the username here is read only, and by default this binding is set as two-way, I believe, which isn't really necessary, I think, because the text of this run can't really be updated from the UI because it's just a text block, not a text box. So regardless, what we can do is just set the binding mode to one-way. So the username data will come from the view model, but our view will never update the username on our view model. So now if we run this, we should see that binding error no longer occur. It's always the little things with WPF, but let's log in and let's go. And here we go, we get hello username. So one issue I see here is that there's a space between the username content and the exclamation point, and that's because we have this last run going onto a new line. So whenever we move to a new line, the text block will insert a space between the runs. So we just want all of these on the same line instead, and that should take care of that issue. And then the other thing, I just want some margin on my entire page. So I'll just have a margin of 25 up here. All right, and let's log in. We get success, and there we go. Hello username with no weird spaces. I feel like the username weight should be bold. Let's set the font weight on username to bold, and let's see how that looks. And there we go. That looks better in my opinion. So now that our UI and navigation is good, let's actually display the username for the user. So when we actually log in with Firebase, so here in our login command, we call sign in with email and password async. This gives us back a Firebase auth link. So let's look at that Firebase auth link. So put that into a variable, and let's take a look at the data on here. So on this auth link, we actually get the user. And on this user, we can get their display name. So this is what we ultimately want to display on our UI. So this is really a case of view model communication and some state management, which I've talked about in other places on my channel. And the way we solve this is with a store. So stores are used to hold our application state, and various view models can get and update data in those stores, which ultimately keeps our data in sync by storing it in one place, which is the store. So in this case, we're going to put the Firebase user into a store so that the home view model can access the user state. So let's create that store. First, we're going to need a stores folder. Let's add a new folder for stores. So let's create this store in our stores folder, and we'll call this store the authentication store. So this home view model is going to grab the user's username from the authentication store, and the authentication store is going to get the Firebase auth link from this login command so that it can provide the username of the authenticated user. So first, let's expose the current user. This is going to be a Firebase user, so let's import that from Firebase auth. We'll call this the current user, and we'll grab this user from a Firebase auth link. So we're going to have to get that Firebase auth link from our login command passed to our authentication store. So that'll go into a field eventually. We'll call this the current Firebase auth link. And we can grab the current user from this. And of course, this auth link could be null, so let's use a conditional operator here. And if it's not null, we'll grab the user. So I guess we should declare that user could be null with a question mark here. But of course, we don't want this Firebase auth link to be null. So let's provide a way to set it. We can just do that in a method here. We'll just call this update. So we're going to update the authentication store with a new Firebase auth link. And now that I think about it, I'm not sure I like this approach. So with this approach, what the login command is going to have to do is use the Firebase auth provider to log in, and then also use the authentication store to set the current Firebase auth link. So overall, I feel like with this approach, we're making the login command do too much, and we could really delegate some of this logic to the authentication store. So instead, what I want to do is just have a login command on our authentication store, and then this authentication store can be responsible for actually executing the login and updating the store. So instead of this bland update method, let's make this login. It's going to have to be async since we're going to hit Firebase. And we'll need the user's credentials, so their email and password to actually log in. Then we're going to need the Firebase auth provider as a field in here so that we can actually execute the login. So let's generate a constructor for that. And now let's do all the login logic. So we can just grab that from our login command. So we're going to sign in with email and password async right here, and passing in the email and password from this method's parameters. There we go. And then we don't even need this variable here. We can just straight up set the current Firebase auth link. So with this approach, I feel like these methods read better, and it also splits up the responsibilities between the authentication store and the login command better too. So let's use this authentication store in the login command now. So we're not going to need the Firebase auth provider here because that's all done in the authentication store now. So let's get the authentication store as a parameter instead. And let's just regenerate this constructor. I feel like that's easier. There we go. So now when we go to login, we're just going to take the authentication store and call login. And that's going to execute the login and set the current Firebase auth link. So now we're going to have to pass in our authentication store to our login command, which is done in our login view model. So we're going to need an authentication store as a parameter to our login view model, so we can pass that to our login command. And now we get into dependency injection. So we're going to resolve an authentication store from dependency injection, which means now we have to register one. So we want to register this as a singleton because it holds application state, and we want our application state to be in sync throughout our application. So we only want one instance of this authentication store. So just to summarize, we're going to log in with our authentication store. That's going to set the current Firebase auth link in this authentication store, which means we can grab the current user of our application from anywhere that has the authentication store. So we want to do that in the home view model. So we want to get our authentication store in the home view model. So let's get that as just a field up here. And we're going to want that passed through the constructor. And now instead of hard coding this username property, we can dig into the authentication store and get the current user of the application and get their display name. And if current user is null, which it really shouldn't be because we'll only get to this page after we've logged in, then we can just fall back to, I guess, unknown. So worst case scenario, it'll say hello unknown. So now the last piece of the puzzle is we just need to pass in the authentication store to our home view model. So we can just resolve that from dependency injection to pass it in. So we can just copy what we do for the login view model and pass it in to the home view model as well. So I'm going to go through and put breakpoints everywhere so we can walk through how this works entirely. And let's see this. All right, so going to login. Here we go. We're going to execute our login command, which is going to go through the authentication store. So let's step into this. And here we go. We're going to hit Firebase to sign in, which will give us back a Firebase auth link, which we're going to set on our authentication store. So let's step over this. Here we go. Firebase auth link is set. And now if we look at this current user property that has a value, which is retrieved from the current Firebase auth link. Here we go. So now if we continue here, login was successful. And we're going to navigate after we accept here. So at this point, we have navigated to our home view model. So our home view is grabbing the username from this view model, and this view model gets the username from the authentication store, which has our authenticated user. So we dig into that, we get the current user, which is not null, and we get the display name, which is Singleton Sean, which is the name I set when I registered this user. So if we continue here, we should see the username, hello Singleton Sean. So just to summarize everything we did, we created this home view, which just has a hello username in the top right. And then we grab this username from the home view model, which exposes this username property. And then we navigate to this home view model after we log in. Then we added this authentication store, which takes on the sign-in logic and sets the current Firebase auth link, which we use to expose the current user of the application. And then we grab the current user in our home view model to display their username. So hopefully you can use these concepts in your own application to display data for authenticated users and manage application state. Regardless, if you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave those below in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video or are enjoying the channel, consider becoming a member. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.